first off, we're glad that you're here. We are recording this webinar. We had several people who reached out to us and said, you know, we can't actually make it, but we'd like to get a copy of it. So if you're registered, whether you're here or not, you'll get a link to the recording, but don't leave because we'd like to have this very interactive and hear from you. We are going to send you, after it's over, we'll send you a short survey. We just like to get some feedback about what you thought about it and how we can do a better job next time. Valerie's got some goodies that we're going to give away via email, and there will be some poll questions. There are two ways to sort of interact with us during it. If you've got a specific question you would like to have Valerie address, if you move your cursor down to the very bottom of the screen, you'll see a thing that says Q&A. You can go in there and type a question, and I'll kind of be monitoring those. And if it's appropriate, I'll feed it to Valerie. Otherwise, we'll hold it, or maybe sometimes I can answer it online. Or if you just have a comment you want to make, and you can do it in the chat, and I'll be watching those. If you put a question there, I'll try to grab that as well. So let me see. Let me check out look at my list here. I think that's all I have to say. Valerie, we are 2 minutes after, so you're up.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate everyone's time today. And again, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. So just a little bit of background on my experience in senior living. I've been in the industry for 15 years. I started as a community sales director. Quite frankly, didn't really know anything about senior living, so grew up in the business. And I spent most of my years in regional sales and regional operations roles, and about 4 years ago joined LeadingResponse as they were heading up their latest vertical, which is the senior living vertical. LeadingResponse has been around for 25 years. They have several different verticals, all sharing the same consumer segment, so that baby boomer, pre-retiree, retiree. And we have quite a bit of data, given that we've been doing these events, again, for 25 years, but we also average about 1,500 campaigns a month across the country. And so we really have quite an advantage to have a good sense from a consumer behavior perspective, but also from a very targeted effort. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I know when I started at LeadingResponse, I was very surprised to learn about things like ailment data and familial connections, and just the layers upon layers of what we call data selects that we have access to that are well beyond basic demographics that in our industry is typically what we use. So with that, let's jump right in. Okay, so just want to talk a little bit about the handouts that you'll be receiving that Steve just mentioned. There'll be a special report on the financial profile of prospects attending community events. And we define prospects as the senior as well as adult child, so it's a mix of both. And then also the trending report and some additional data there. And then we'll also include, of course, the PDF version of this presentation. And we also have an offer for new clients to use our services, and we'll go over that just before the end of the program. All right, so let's just kind of set the stage here in terms of the data that we're going to be talking about. The profile and survey consisted of 250,000 prospective residents, including their adult children and caregivers that we invited to these community events. 20,000 is the number of prospects that attended a community event and participated in this survey, which is a nationwide survey. And 27 is the number of unique demographic elements in the profile, and we'll be talking about a couple of those key criteria today. Okay, so attracting financially pre-qualified prospect is one of the 5 trends, also community event preferences, booking more tours, the one topic they want to discuss, and you are speaking to highly educated people. So we'll go in more detail into these as well. So let's talk, we're going to talk a little bit about attracting financially pre-qualified prospects. So let's look at some of the data points here. 75% have a household income of more than $75,000. 74% have income producing assets in excess of $250,000. So income producing assets, are also known as IPA, does not include the home asset. So just keep that in mind, that the home asset is separate from this financial criteria. 76% have a net worth of more than 500,000. So the home asset comes into play when we're talking about net worth. So that would be, everything included, whether it be liquid asset or, real estate type of asset. 44% have more than 75,000 in home equity. Now, this is a data point that, you may just kind of assume, again, being from the industry, sometimes we think, okay, this family has a loved one who's lived in their home for 40 or 50 years. So we just assume that there's no mortgage, that there's plenty of equity. And in fact, that isn't always the case. Nowadays, of course, there could be a reverse mortgage, there could be a home equity line out. So it's just another good data point to have, to know that not only is that person a homeowner, but also that there's a certain amount of home equity available.
So Valerie, got a couple quick questions for you. The first one is the age demographic. This is for the seniors or for themselves as opposed to the family members, and what age group are we talking about?
Great question. So this would be for the senior themselves. So these demographics are specific to the seniors, and they would be ages 70 to 99.
Okay. And okay, great.
Okay, perfect.
One other question: are U.S. versus Canada? Is it different? Do you do Canada, and is it different?
Sure. We do support Canada. It is different for a few reasons. One would be, of course, just the exchange rate. So it's more costly for Canadian communities, but also because there are significant privacy laws in Canada. So for example, only basic demographics can really be targeted in Canada versus ailment data, familial connections that we are able to get here in the States. With that being said, Canada is also a culture of that social engagement. And so for the clients that we have hosted these campaigns for in Canada, they tend to have high response rates, even though it's a basic demographic cohort. It's still that age, income, proximity to community. So from a financial perspective, that they are still qualified, but it's great to be able to have additional data beyond just that, initial look. And so they do have a good response rate, higher than average here in the States. And that's, again, because it's just conducive in that, that culture to be in that social environment.
Great.
Okay, so do we have the results of that poll question?
Yeah, so we have got essentially 56% are holding offsite meetings, is what the number looks like. So.
Great. Okay, excellent. That's good to hear. I mean, I think overall, we need a combination of on-site and off-site just to better understand psychological barriers that exist and meet people where they're at in that neutral setting. And so, for your integrated marketing plan, you should absolutely be looking at both.
So the other question that somebody had, now this is actually a really important question, Dave, I appreciate your asking it, is that having 75,000 in Kansas is a lot different than having $75,000 of net worth in Los Angeles or Seattle or New York. So do you have any thoughts or data on the differences geographically in terms of what those economic numbers mean?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, these are national numbers, but we do have clients across the country in, very rural markets, for example. And so some of our analysis, map data that comes back when we're first working with clients will show, smaller numbers for a combination of adult children and potential residents, for example. But we're still able to get good response rates because not only is it the targeted effort, it's also incorporating those consumer behaviors. And it's also, again, meeting people where they're at, providing the topics of education, and we'll go through that a little bit more in depth. So it may be a smaller data select, but you still have qualified people, and it's going to be relative to what you're seeing in your market in terms of the demographics that exist.
Okay, great.
All right, so the second trend would be community event preferences. So 154 is the % increase in response rates to offsite community events versus on-site events. So to talk a little bit more about that, a couple of things here. One is that, we will run oftentimes with clients, we'll run what we call A/B testing. And so that would be, one event hosted on site with everything else the same. The mail hitting mailbox is the same, the creative, the content, the targeted efforts. everything exactly the same except the actual, physical location and environment of where the event is taking place. And so what we see is an average of 1.4% attending on-site events versus an average of 2.4% when it's hosted off-site. And so, when we see those differences in numbers, there's a few things that will come to mind. One is, again, when we go back to those psychological barriers and understanding our consumers, we know that there are a group of consumers, whether they be adult children or potential residents, that are hesitant to walking into the community as their first interaction with your sales team, with whoever they may encounter. They may not have walked into a senior living community before. They may have no idea. And again, in this industry, we know there are a lot of misperceptions out there. And so, to meet them in that neutral setting, and where it's safety in numbers, they feel comfortable. It's typically an Italian American middle of the road cuisine that's generally 15 or 20 minutes from the community, because again, consumer behaviors will tell us that folks will not drive longer than 15 or 20 minutes to attend an educational seminar about senior living. And so you keep them in that social environment, and that's really where we see the difference in the percentages.
Okay, so I've got a couple questions for you, and maybe you're going to get to this. First question is, what kind of events offsite events do people do? So are you going to spend some time maybe later on, or do you want to do that now?
Sure, I can answer that now. So typically these are educational seminars, so different than a themed event that you might be hosting on site, whether it be, a luau party or a speaker talking about memory care or, caring for the caregiver topics. This is more about education around senior living and your specific community. So you want to help people understand topics like, what are the costs of senior living? How do people cover those costs? So you get to talk about long-term care insurance, veteran aid and attendance benefit, home asset, all of those different things. Also, we have a lot of adult children that want to learn more about how do you have the conversation with the loved one? How do you deal with the family dynamics when there are 4 or 5 siblings? And of course, very rarely are they all going to agree that, mom or dad needs to be in senior living or have home care or whatever the case might be. So we have, again, based on data, because we run these so frequently and we survey all of these folks that attend, we know the best topics that they want to learn about. And we also know the best days of the week that they want to attend, as well as the time. So when you think about an adult child who's likely still working, if you want to host an event at 4:30, 5, or even 5:30 in most markets across the country, you'll have a hard time getting people there. And again, we've run these A/B tests, so we know the best time to host is 6 or 6:30 when you have an adult child that is going to be attending, because they just can't get there sooner than that.
Terrific. Next question is, what percentage of the people that you're talking to, or the residents you're talking to, have long-term care insurance? Do you know?
We don't know. That's not a point that we ask in the current surveys, but I know that just from being in the industry, it's typically only between 20 and 30%. Now that may have changed, but it's a fairly low number.
Okay, that's actually better than I would have expected, to tell you the truth. And then the other question is are you finding success for those does this work for people who are offering freestanding assisted living memory care, or is this better just for, say, CCRCs?
Great question. So as many people know, CCRC life plan communities traditionally host offsite, in a country club setting or yacht club, or just, offsite, and that's something that they've done for many years and done it successfully. But we have more clients that are that traditional IL, memory care, or even freestanding memory care, that will host these offsite, because at the end of the day, the psychological barriers are the same for those adult children and potential residents, so it's still a case of meeting them offsite. Now, what I will say is that when you have folks off-site, you have the opportunity to build a rapport, because again, we know it's very much about relationships. You build the rapport, you educate them, so now those misperceptions that they had going into the event are gone, and it's that natural next step for them to come on site and tour, and maybe perhaps have a one-on-one phone conversation before going into tour, but they're essentially ready to take that next step, whereas before, those folks were not going to walk into the community if you were hosting that same exact event on site, not to the degree that we see offsite. And that's that second bullet point there, the 2.4 average response offsite versus the 1.4 on site.
Right. And
Okay.
this, and there's one other question. I think we've already addressed it, but this is primarily private pay market, right?
Yes, it is. Although we do have clients that, of course, have communities that have a certain percentage that are, whether they be the state waiver program through Medicaid, or it might be a tax credit program that they have. And so, although we're typically targeting for that more affluent private pay client, there are some communities that say, we need to lower the income to, let's say, 40,000, because the program that we offer caps out at 40,000 in order to meet the criteria for someone to live there. So we can absolutely go lower in terms of financial criteria, but generally, yes, it's on the higher end.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so then the last data point here would be that 84% of prospects rated the offsite community event they attended as very good or excellent. And again, this is indicative of people getting what they need in terms of the education and building a relationship and keeping those anxiety levels low versus having walked into the community and just, quite frankly, not knowing what to expect. And again, put yourself in the shoes of the consumer. There's the role reversal happening many times. There are, emotional situations. There's the family dynamics that are creating situations of, one wants it, the other doesn't. And, at the end of the day, unfortunately, this is still an industry where folks aren't showing up with their bags packed, so excited to move into senior living. And we're trying to change that as an industry. And I think, with future generations, that will change to some degree. But today, the generation that we're focusing on is still a generation of, I want to stay in my home. And I want to save my money for my loved ones, So there is an opportunity for you to be able to capture those people that, quite frankly, just will not go to your community on site as their first interaction with you. You just simply won't hear from them if you're sending them mailers or trying to, target them digitally.
Terrific.
One other thing that I'll comment on this is what I like to call plate lickers. So as we look at offsite versus onsite, we know, of course, that the offsite event is going to be more costly from a food perspective than it would be on-site. Your raw food is typically going to be around $10 per person versus offsite, an average is about $30 per person. But keep in mind that your overall lead generation rate will be lower if you do it on-site than if you do it off-site. But what I'll say about what we call plate lickers is that because this is such a targeted approach, you don't have people showing up just for the free meal. Very rarely do we hear from clients that say, we had a room full of people and they were just there for the food. Might you have one or two? Sure. But this is not a targeted approach where, you're putting an ad in the newspaper where you will get, unfortunately, people that aren't meeting your criteria for qualifications. And then, yes, they will be there just for, the free food. But these are folks that can dine there on their own. They can afford to do that. They don't need to sit through a presentation amongst strangers, although in the same life situation as them, and talk about senior living. So, very rarely do we see that. So I just wanted to address that because I know that sometimes that's a concern of, people are just going to show up for the free food.
So are there events that are sort of more popular for entrance fee versus a straight rental type community? So does it vary on that? Or are they more or less the same, or how do you do that?
They are more or less the same. I mean, the demographic is a little different, of course, for the CCRC life plan communities. We have a very recent client who has a community and their entry fee starts at $1 million. And so, of course, the targeted effort that we're going to do on the financial side is going to be much higher than it would be if it was, a rental IL property. So from a targeting perspective, things are different, but from an overall presentation, the themes and the topics are the same because, again, it comes down to education. And so it gives them an opportunity to learn about entry fee and what it means to live in a continuum care retirement community, which, again, there's a lot of misperceptions about.
Terrific.
Okay, so booking more tours is the third trend. So let's talk a little bit about this. 85% of the prospects attending an offsite community event were asked to schedule a tour, which is great. That's a good sign that the presenter or co-presenters are engaging with folks and they're asking for that tour to get to that next step. 74% agreed to schedule a tour of the community hosting the offsite event. And again, this is not surprising to us because from a consumer behavior perspective, again, you're meeting them where they're at, they're comfortable, they're learning what they needed to learn, and now they're ready to take that next step. And again, it could be the tour right away, but it might also be that one-on-one phone conversation to have, more specific dialogue about their needs and wants.
Well, the other thing I would just say is that, somebody once said that nobody ever calls a brain surgeon, a divorce attorney, or a senior living community unless they have a real need. And I think that very likely, if somebody's going to, as you described, somebody's going to take the time to come to a conversation like that, it's because they have a real need, or at least think they might have a real a need for doing that. One of the questions that, and I was sort of wondering the same thing, is how do you determine who you're going to reach out to invite to the event? So I assume that if you're reaching out for a $1 million entrance fee CCRC, it's going to be a different target that you're reaching out to than more traditional standalone IL or memory care.
Right, exactly. So that's kind of, the beginning process. So when we start working with a new client and they've identified certain communities that they have some lead generation needs for, and it could be a lease up, new development, or it could be for whatever reason a challenged community from an occupancy and revenue perspective. And so what we do is we take a closer look at the primary market area. We look at, the total addressable market. What is available for them to target within those different demographics of age, income, proximity to community, and then those additional data selects that I mentioned. And again, there's quite a few, but the ones that we generally look at would be ailment data. We look at familial connections, which is when the senior lives in the same proximity as the adult child. And so there's a lot of different layers that we can go once we have that, basic income and, age and proximity to community. When we have that cohort, then we can, further layer from there. And then we also have an initial conversation with the community to get a sense of, what are the demographics that they're seeing? Where are they getting their inquiries from? What is the mix of adult child versus potential resident? We can't assume that in traditional IL that people are, calling on their own behalf. Oftentimes, for anyone that's there on the line that is working with IL communities, oftentimes you're hearing from the adult child, and it may ultimately be the potential resident's decision, but the adult child more and more is involved in that decision, and they're the ones making that initial inquiry. So we get all of that data ahead of time, and the communities know their local market best, and what their assets, if you will, are within that community. And so then once we have that targeted demographic, we then look at what is the call to action, again incorporating the consumer behaviors, knowing the best topics they want to learn about. And then it also comes down to, hitting the mailboxes at the right time. It's also going to look at, what is the mailer you're sending out? Direct mail is still the best way to reach this consumer segment. And in future generations, I'm sure that will change as we're already seeing a shift with more digital. But direct mail, if you were to, for example, mail out a postcard, it's only read at a rate of 54%. Versus a letter style personalized invitation package that is read at a rate of 78%. So, all of those variables are important to achieve that highest response rate, which of course is the main objective of a campaign like this.
So Valerie, I'm not sure that you've got these numbers, but looking at this particular slide here, do you have sort of comparable percentages in terms of conversion for on-site events?
Sure. So great question there. In conversions, we see on an average, again, nationwide for our senior living clients, they average an inquiry to tour of 40%. They average a tour to move-in of 25%. And their overall inquiry to move-in averages between 8 and 10%.
Okay.
And in terms of the sales cycle, that's going to be in line with the various product types, right? So the CCRC life plan tends to be about 22 months sales cycle or gestational period. And then, of course, memory care tends to be a lot shorter than that. So it's pretty much in line with the product type that you're offering.
Okay. Two more quick questions for you. How many people normally attend one of your offsite events?
We recommend no more than 50 in each event date. Now, keep in mind that our campaigns consist of 2 event dates. And again, that is to play to the consumer behaviors, because if you send an invitation out and you only have one date, you may have someone that has an interest, but they have a conflict with that date. And so you can bet that they're not going to pick up the phone and call you and say, geez, I'm sorry, I wish this was a different date. I'd love to come. It's simply going in the trash. And so instead, by offering them 2 dates, it gives them the choice, and then you are more likely to get, someone to enroll in one of those 2 dates. So essentially, a campaign would consist of 2 event dates and 50 max capacity in each one, just so that you keep it social and you have an opportunity to mingle with them, and also so that they don't feel a level of anxiety if they're sitting amongst 100 or 150 people.
So another question is, how are you finding the family connection stats? And I think the question is how are you finding the people to reach out to?
How do we find them? So I think if I understand that question from the targeted effort. So there are a couple of different ways that we do that. LeadingResponse, having been in business for 25 years, has a very significant database, proprietary database that we've cultivated. We have over 22 million adult children and potential residents in that database. So we draw from that, as well as the 3 large list providers. So your AccuData, Experian, Epsilon, and it's basically a culmination of all of those. And then again, we factor in the consumer behavior. So there's quite a bit of science behind it. And of course, it's different for each community and each market.
Yeah, and I would just add that I've spent quite a bit of time looking at this data stuff and talking to people in various marketing roles. And it's, as I know you know, Valerie, it's really creepy how much data they know that's available about you. I actually asked somebody who was in this space to run a report on me that I never heard back from, and they probably found out stuff that I didn't want to know. I'm not sure, but there's so much data out there. We just, unfortunately or unfortunately, the myth of privacy is largely a myth, right? So that works to your advantage in doing this.
Right.
But in the move-in statistics, the conversion rate statistics, I've had a couple of questions, people asking to you to restate those again.
Oh, sure. So our averages for our senior living clients nationwide in terms of conversions are overall an 8 to 10% inquiry to move in. And then more specifically, the inquiry to tour averages 40%, and the tour to move in averages 25%. And as a reminder, the sales cycle is in line with the product type that they're offering.
Okay, and then do you provide a self or family member assessment that the adult child can use to figure out need?
Yes, those are all things that we provide to our clients for them to essentially customize and provide during the events, which we do recommend, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this.
Perfect. Okay, I think I'm done with questions for the moment.
Great. Okay, so let's see where we left off here. 74% agreed to schedule a tour. 80% said they would recommend their friends and colleagues to tour the community hosting the offsite event. So this has been a great opportunity, and one that I wasn't expecting, where folks will bring a colleague or give their invitation to a colleague because maybe they don't have an interest, but they know that their colleague is dealing with this, and they'll provide them the invitation, and so then they attend. Same thing on the IL or CCRC memory care side, life plan side, would be folks giving it to a neighbor. They may live in a 55 plus community and they're thinking, well, I'm not ready yet, but I know that my neighbor Janice is. And so we've seen clients have move-ins from folks that weren't even on our target list, but they received it from a friend, they attended, and they were qualified, they did move in. But keep in mind that there are, especially in densely populated areas, you'll have, let's say, 30,000 targeted folks. You're only going to mail to about 10,000, if that. It's kind of on the high end. So she, that neighbor may have been part of the other 20,000 that just didn't get the invitation. It doesn't mean that she wasn't going to meet your qualifications.
Cool.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this in terms of evaluation forms and what we see in terms of best practices. So post-event evaluation form. So this is something that our clients rave about. This is an opportunity at the event. And again, whether it's hosted on-site or offsite, it's just a great opportunity to be able to provide folks with another way to communicate with you. And as the presenter, it gives you the opportunity to ask a couple of questions about the presentation. That way you can just get that feedback from the presentation aspect. But also, more importantly, you want there to be some questions there for folks so that they can communicate with you in somewhat passive way, right? So you're going to have a room full of people, you've done the presentation, you've let them know what the next steps look like. And we go through all of this with our clients. So we essentially provide them all of the best practices so they don't have to figure it out for themselves. But so, what we want to encourage here is that person that has an interest in taking the next step, but they don't want to wait around to talk to that community person at the end of the event. Sometimes people will, but oftentimes people are going to get up, they're going to take the information that they received, and now, of course, the chase begins, right? And so we're calling them, we're emailing, you're doing all of these things to try to further cultivate that lead. And by giving them something in front of them that allows them to check a box and simply say, yes, I'm interested in touring, or yes, I'm interested in a follow-up phone call. Tuesday at 7 works best for me. Here's my name and phone number. It's just a great opportunity, and a lot of our clients do see that there are several people that will provide that kind of information that unfortunately have been lost opportunities otherwise. They would have gotten the information, and in their mind, they would have left thinking, okay, I've got to follow up with, Mary Jane, who just did the presentation. But let's be honest, that doesn't always happen. And so it's a great way to, again, further communicate with them in a different way.
Great.
Offering the pre-tour phone appointment is another great one, and simply just letting people know that those are some of the next steps that families take, because not everybody's ready to come on site and tour. There may be those family dynamics that they need to get through. There is a level of kind of social work that we do, right, when we're working with families and helping them understand the pros and the cons and helping them work through some of the family dynamics. And the other thing, I think the question previously was about other types of tools. And so one of the things that our clients also do will be a financial worksheet, for example. And the financial worksheet is great because, again, there are so many misperceptions that people just automatically assume that it's just outside their range. It's too costly. They're not thinking about, the property taxes that they're not going to have to pay anymore. They're not going to have the grocery food bill. They're not going to have the utility bills. And so, the clients that we have that use those evaluation tools, it's very helpful for that adult child and also the senior to be able to visually see that, this is actually more affordable than I thought, or geez, I forgot about how much it's costing me to replace my heating system at home, or, and then of course, and that's just the hard cost, right? There are the other costs of the daughter who's trying to manage everything, and she's stopping by mom's home doing management and making sure her clothes are laid out the next day, and just all of those little things that we know, adult children do for families when it's getting to a point that they probably need to make another decision.
Okay. So you mentioned about postcards having a 50% open rate and another type of invitation 75% rate. It's a question that was typed in.
Yes, 54% read rate for postcards and 78% read rate for letter style invitation packages that are personalized.
Okay. So you talk about letter packages, so it sounds like it's more than just a letter. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is?
Sure. So that's essentially, it's a package of an invitation to host an event. And again, whether it's on site or off site, but it is a letter style package that is higher end. It's going to stick out in the mail because although direct mail is still the best way to communicate, it's very competitive, right? So every time we get our mail, there is a whole lot of junk mail in there. And so we don't want that invitation to get lost in the junk mail. So that's one reason we don't do postcards, but another reason is because we want it to stand out in the mail. And so it's an oversized package. It has their name personalized there, and that's how we get such a high open rate. And then of course, once they open it, now we need to capture their attention with a strong call to action, right? So we're going to talk about some of the topics that will be discussed at this event. We let them know that it's a complimentary event, so they know for certain that there is no cost. Again, it's at that local venue, so the anxiety level is lower, and we give them the two options in terms of dates. So again, it's all of those things together. It's kind of that recipe for success. If you leave out any of those components, then unfortunately your response rate will suffer.
Okay, how do you know what the open rate is? Two people that have that, and I'm curious too.
Oh, that's a great question. So that is a data point just in general about postcards versus letter style packages. And I don't have it in front of me, but I do know it comes from the American Marketing Association, AMA.
Okay. Great.
Okay, so the fourth trend, the one topic prospects want to discuss at community events. 67% of the prospects responding wanted more information on the cost to live at a community hosting the event. Now, this may seem very obvious to us, and I can tell you that there are several instances where that does not happen at these events. And I've been in the room myself, and I'm hopeful that, you know, we're getting past that point. I know some of the providers actually post their fee structure on their websites now. And, you know, I can remember years ago when you would never find that. And we don't recommend bringing your fee schedule to these events. You know, you don't want that full packet for the person in the audience just yet. You want to give them a range and an understanding, and then also how people cover the cost. So, you know, it could be a range of X to X, and let them know that it's dependent on things like the size of the apartment, the level of care that they need. Again, you're educating people because they have assumptions and they're already assuming that it's very expensive. And so if they leave that event and they feel like, I really needed to learn more about the cost and how to cover the costs, you've lost them at that point. You know, you've got that opportunity while you're educating them to talk about the costs, and not just for your specific community, but of course just overall what the costs are in senior living, and then also help them see how people cover those costs, because again, they don't necessarily know. I mean, I've had families years ago that found a long-term care insurance policy and they didn't even know that their parent had one, and then here it was, and it made the difference of whether they could live in senior living or not. As well as, you know, looking at this targeted effort. Again, I keep going back to that targeted effort. These financially qualified folks are out there, and so if you take that extra step of that additional targeted effort, you know, looking well beyond just income, look at their IPA, look at their net worth, look at the home equity they have, the value of their home. Those are folks that then can afford the services. You just need to help them see the value and also understand how they can do it for the long term, because if those people are planners, and those people want to have money to save for their loved ones. And so it's important to help them see how they can achieve the care levels that they need and the quality of life that they need today, but still be able to have something to leave to their families.
One of the things that occurs to me as I've been sort of looking at your numbers and thinking about this is that it may very well be that this style of reaching out to prospects will actually touch people who might otherwise not even have seriously considered senior living, and so it may end up being a way that actually increases the market penetration in a given market. So if thinking something's wrong, mom, maybe need to do something with mom, she's living at home, and I get this invitation, it's like, oh yeah, I guess I really should consider doing that, and it starts this process. So I really like that. So
yeah, great point. And we do see folks, you know, early on in the funnel that are just starting their research, and they are attending, to your point, Steve. And then we see folks that are actively dealing with what do we do and how do we do this, and, you know, and they get the invitation. So sometimes it's just timing. You know, we don't typically see people in the audience who raise their hand and say, my mom's in the rehab down the street and she's being discharged Friday. I mean, generally those, of course, are going to come from discharge planners or from other ways directly to the community when they're a more acute situation.
Question is, what's the harm in giving your fee schedule out at these meetings? People want transparency. Why try to hide it?
Great question, and we do not recommend hiding it at all. But when you put yourself in the environment of, you know, sitting amongst 40 or 50 other people, and you only have so much time to do this presentation, so you want to be able to give, you know, some high-level information. And the flow of the event is done by design, and we go through all of that with our clients as well, so that they know kind of how much time you should be up there presenting versus, you know, dining with the guests, and again building that rapport and that relationship. And so what you don't want to have happen is if you pass around your full packet that is going to include your fee schedule, now you've lost some of the attention of folks, because they're simply, just by human nature, they're going to open the packet, they're going to look through it, and they're going to start, you know, looking at the numbers, and there are a lot of numbers on the fee schedule, right? I mean, let's be honest, it depends on the size of the unit and the care levels, and sometimes a certain amount of care is included, and then additional care packages are more. And so you could have a whole event in education just on the fee structure, right? And so we find that when folks get enough information, then they're ready to take that next step and then find out more specifically, based on their situation, what the actual cost would look like.
Great. Perfect.
All right. So just a reminder here, in terms of the financial criteria, 75% had a household income of more than $75,000.
There we are. We're back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I thought I just lost you.
Yeah.
Okay. The fifth one is you're speaking to highly educated people. So when we look at this, 64% of the prospects attending offsite community events have an undergraduate or graduate degree. And, the educational cohort aside, we know that consumers are savvier than they ever were, right? I mean, for anyone that's been in the business for 5 years or more, you know that the consumer is changing. There's a lot more information online and available to them. Senior living as a whole is not, as new as it used to be. It's been around now for quite some time. If anything, the latest segment of 55 plus active adults that are being built in these urban areas is kind of the latest segment that people don't necessarily know a lot about. But overall, people nowadays have some familiarity with senior living. Again, still a lot of misperceptions, but they have a general idea and they understand that it's not the same as, the traditional skilled nursing facilities.
Yep.
Okay, the next poll question here, I'm not sure what you have on your end, Steve.
I think I've got that one.
Great. So on average, how many attendees do you have at your current marketing event? So the ranges would be 10 to 20, 20 to 30, or 30 or more.
Okay, so we're going to relaunch this. Okay, so it looks like we have got 10 to 20 is 44%, 20 to 30 is 33%, and 30 plus is 23%.
Great. Okay. And so as we've talked about, we look at 50 max in each event date, and generally we see, and I'll show you a sample client campaign in just a moment, but we do see certainly more than 30 in each event. So we're averaging, even for those that are hosted on site, on-site average equates to about 60 new leads, and the off-site equates to about 110 new leads. And again, those are averages. This is just a snapshot or case study of one of our clients' communities. This was a new community, AL and Memory Care in Lincoln, Nebraska. They hosted a campaign in January earlier this year. And as of September, they had 7 move-ins, which equated to a 7.5% inquiry to move-in. So just to give you an idea, we've got a snapshot of kind of what our campaign dashboard looks like, and this is where our clients can access their leads in real time. You can see there were 2 events. The total capacity was 160. They had increased that capacity based on the response rate. And we see of the total reservations, we see about 60% of those being one-to-one, what we call unique leads. And that's because most times they'll bring a family member influencer to the event who also needs the information, but of course they're not both looking for a lease. It's just one and the other is a family member. So you can see here that, by doing it off-site, they were able to achieve an influx of new leads, and they toured a significant amount, and then, of course, the move-ins. Now, these leads, of course, they're still cultivating, so these numbers should grow in time, but you can see from January to September, they had already achieved 7 move-ins.
What is the cost? Cost per lead is the question that actually 2 people have asked.
The cost per lead regarding the poll question before, or what?
No, what are you saying is the cost per lead with your clients?
Sure. For our clients and for these campaign services, the cost per lead averages about $120, and the industry average cost per lead is in the 400s. The cost per tour is in the 800s, and the cost per move-in or cost per acquisition is upwards of $3,500 to $4,000.
Okay, and what's your cost for move-in or for move-in?
Our average cost per move-in is $1,500.
Okay, cool.
All right, any other questions on this data? All right, so just some key takeaways here, target beyond basic demographics. Again, there are so many additional data selects that you can look at, so go well beyond basic demographics so that you can really have the strongest qualified candidate in front of you. And then incorporating those consumer behaviors, so again, you can have the highest response rate and the number of new leads that you need. That type of campaign that I just showed you is a campaign that you can do twice a year throughout your community, and it doesn't have to be this monthly marketing event that you're doing and only achieving 15 or 20 people attending.
And how many a year?
It depends on the community. So for established communities, we recommend 2 or 3 per year. For lease up, new build, they're just starting from scratch with their lead base, typically once a quarter. And it also depends on the other marketing efforts and lead sources that they're incorporating.
Great, cool. So in response to the one in the chat, one of the question, what's the campaign per lead? I got a response that said wow in all caps. So I think that's good.
I was going to say, typically people really like that because it is about a third of the cost of the average, industry cost per lead, per tour, and per move-in.
Great. So we're at the end. We answered the cost. What's the cost of the whole campaign is, I think, the question that's being asked. So
Sure. It depends on the size of the campaign because, again, it depends on the community, right? So if the community is on the smaller side, it will be lower cost, smaller quantity versus a larger community that's infill, and then it's a higher quantity. So everything is done on a per piece basis, and we'd be happy to go through this with people more specifically as it relates to their markets. But just to give you an average, it can be as low as $2,500 for the campaign, upwards of $8,500.
great. So again, being transparent about costs, so I really appreciate that because sometimes there's a hesitancy to do that. So I think with that, we've got some freebies we're going to send out. I apologize for the technical delays. I'm going to blame the weather because of the wind we're having here. We will get some things out, and then you have a special promotion you want to talk about.
Yes, so that's there on everyone's screen. So we will be adding 500 free mail pieces by the end of the year for our new clients with a minimum quantity of 5,000 pieces. So if you have any interest, feel free to reach out to us. You can go on to our website, LeadingResponse.com. Certainly reach out to me. My contact information is there. I'd be happy to get you in touch with some folks on our team. And there's no cost, by the way. If you want us to just pull some market analysis for you and give you an idea of what's available in your market for things like ailment data, familial connections, especially those that might be in a rural market, we're happy to do that. And again, there's no cost to you. So thank you again, everyone, for your time.
Just one more quick question for you. So the cost that you're talking about does not include the cost of the meal or the restaurant, right? That's the promotional stuff?
Right. So the cost of the meal is going to be determined whether you do it on-site or off-site. So again, off-site is going to be more like $30 per person. On-site will be, $10 raw food cost. But everything else is included in our pricing. The letter style wedding invitation packages, of course, the targeted efforts, the postage, the printing, everything has the client brand standards incorporated as well, so it has that look and feel of the client, and Leading Response is behind the scenes. It also includes the call center where we take all of the RSVPs, we make all of the reminder calls, and then there's a web-based portal where folks can log in and see their leads in real time and see the demographics associated to those leads, which really help from a sales strategy perspective when they're working those leads post-event.
Perfect. So we will send out some, you'll get some things from me and some things from Leading Response in the next day or so. And we appreciate your attending. And Valerie, thank you for doing this. This is really cool stuff. I really like it. So.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having us.
You bet. Thank you very much. Alrighty. Thank you very much. We're done.
Bye-bye.